welcome to episode 10 of the Trevor May podcast. This week, we are discussing the magical world of stats and data. Hey guys, welcome back to episode 10 of the Trevor May podcast. I'm your host, Trevor May. And this week I'm actually pretty excited to talk about the role that data and stats play in not only my career and my other projects, but also just in life in general, and maybe clear a lot of the air on what it means or what the value is and how I use numbers and things to improve my play and give me unique insight into, where improvements need to happen and so on and so forth. It's so odd that baseball is a little bit slower in the adoption of approaching the game of baseball scientifically from a math standpoint than, say, other sports. And I think that some of it has to do with, football has some statistics and things, but a lot of that stuff is based on injury. It's based on the study of injuries and why they happen. And those sports are like basketball and football are a little bit more contact and therefore a little bit more dangerous in people making, contact with each other all the time. And so that kind of became the forefront of study, I guess, and numbers, as we see the show Sports Science on ESPN for the last few years. It's interesting to explain things in that way, force and momentum and all that stuff. And it just becomes a little bit more important when those two force things can cause injury. So it's very interesting to me. A lot of people don't really know how much of a role statistics, and we're talking advanced metrics, sabermetrics, and things of the like, and data play in making baseball decisions. And I think that fans have seen a huge uptick, especially in the last 5 years or so, in the amount of numbers, on a broadcast with TrackMan and with StatCast, and also with decision making by teams, with shifts, with pitching decisions, with the number of pitchers being changed, the way that velocities have gone up in pitchers in general, how long starters are being used into games unless they're an absolute stud, and how quickly you go to a bullpen, and what you're kind of how you're looking to form your team. A lot of deep value decisions are being made, and for the fan, for the regular person, a lot of that stuff there might be questions around it, and how are those decisions being made, and what is this all based on, and what is sabermetrics, and why is it relevant? So let me just start from the basic blocks. I'm actually really excited about this episode because this is something I'm just, from an intellectual curiosity standpoint, I'm just super interested in, because, like I talked about in the previous episode with Jake Lyon, the concept of min-max, of peak efficiency and use of resources to get the best desired result, and that's math, right? That concept is a mathematical equation of sorts. What the variables are in that equation change from situation to situation, or it could be different in all kinds, but the premise of it being an equation is very universal. And so I've applied that to kind of how I improve and how I look at my game, and that has kind of led me to go even deeper into specifically from how I throw. And again, like we say, a lot of this intellectual curiosity comes from injury. I want to go way back to the first point to start. When you're injured, you're much more motivated to find the cause of that injury and to be clear in what caused or what may have been causing it, and then take very appropriate steps so that it never happens to you again, because being on the field is more important than not being on the field. You can't play well if you're not playing at all, right? So that's step one. You kind of start to look at every aspect of yourself and how you play when you're hurt, and it's easy to kind of stay on it every day. Like, it's easy to like try to loosen up your hip when your hip feels tight every day, but when it starts to go away, staying on that program is even harder, right? So like backing that up with data that, hey, this will never come back, and that's your incentive. It's more incentive to stay on your program. So let's talk a little bit about the advent of sabermetrics and some of the. So let me explain what sabermetrics are for those of you that don't know. Firstly, sabermetrics is a way of interpreting classical baseball stats, runs, walks, hits, errors, home runs, doubles, and assigning values to what all those outcome statistics mean. So in my head, I separate a lot of statistics. Go in different buckets, and they're used for different reasons. They tell a different story. The recording of data on any event. Now, this is outside the scope of sports even. This is this is what scientists do. This is what researchers do. They start to record as many data points as possible about something they want to understand more clearly, right? So baseball is played in a way where outcomes of events can be clearly recorded in the form of traditional stats. That was a hit, that was an error, that was the ball was. Then you start going deeper. How hard was it hit? Where was it hit? And all that stuff, right? But so we have our traditional stats, and that's how it was for a long time. Earned run average was a clear indicator of how good a pitcher was. Wins and losses were really important for determining how good a pitcher was. We see this in how for 80 years, 90 years, how every Hall of Famer was picked, right? It was all about like huge bodies of work and constant success over that large body of work, right? And then since our understanding from a scientific standpoint has grown, and what were all the huge the plethora of factors determining why those people were so good, is now starting to factor in. Now we're looking for those factors as well, outside of even just the results on the mound. This guy has these characteristics that could make him that person. He could be that person if he just makes a couple tweaks. That is the idea that is now starting to drive a lot of baseball decisions. And we've gotten to the point where now we have outcome statistics. So we'll call those out. Traditional stats are outcome statistics in my head. I'll put that in a bucket. We'll try to organize it in that way, right? So we have outcome statistics over a timeline. This happens sequentially over time, these stats. Then, in order to find deeper value and isolate specific situations, meaning you start to see, you start to derive specific value from players. For example, you start to assign, values to certain statistics and how valuable they are to certain situations. For example, fielder independent pitching, FIP, okay? FIP is supposed to be a comparative stat to earned run average. Earned run average is how many runs that are earned are given up per 9 innings, per game. So if you were to pitch 9 innings, how many earned runs did you give up, right? Now, as you can imagine, there's some arbitrary kind of intangible stuff that goes on there. For example, your scorer, if they score something, they perceive something as a hit when it's most of the time it's an error, or vice versa, that can affect your earned run average, because then that could lead to more runs. Your fielders behind you have a lot to do with how many earned runs you give up. That's just the fact of the game. Some guys have less range than others. Some guys are very good defenders. Some guys aren't good defenders. Maybe one guy gets to a ball and catches it easily, where the other center fielder just lets it drop in between them and it's a double. Because he wasn't even close, it can't be called an error. Things of that nature, right? fielder independent pitching then seeks to isolate the as many, or some simple outcomes that pitchers are in full control over themselves that are away from pitchers or from their defense. So this includes hits, walks. I don't know the exact formula, but this includes hits and walks and strikeouts, or not even hits. I don't believe. I believe walks, strikeouts. It's very, very strikeout heavy. And so it says, it's basically, the premise is FIP is going to tell you what your ERA would be with a average defense, right? So for me specifically, my fielder independent pitching is much lower than my career ERA, which you can point to a defense having something to do with that. And of course, that isolates itself more and more and more the bigger the sample size of games. So if you go throw 200 games and your FIP is still a run lower, there's something happening. You can't be that unlucky that much, right? It's just the statistical probability of that happening is very low. So you start to look in other places. So you start to see guys with very, very good defenses. For example, anyone really who pitched for the San Francisco Giants from 2010 to 2016, right, with their great defense they still have a great defense. You see a lot of guys kind of pitching around their ERA potential. Their FIP and their ERA are fairly close to each other, meaning their defense is very efficient at getting the outs they should get out. That's an example of, they're like, ERA doesn't tell the story. It's too broad, so they then start to isolate very specific stats to kind of get a better idea of what a pitcher's value is from a runs per 9 inning standpoint. Okay, that's the premise. They're like, this is too broad. There's too many factors here that are uncontrollable by a pitcher. So let's try to isolate as much as we can for those things and see how good they are, so that you can start transfer them from team to team, and it kind of stays universal. They could fit into a good defense. You can make a decision based on that, right? That's a prime example, right? So if we go really, really clearly, or really simple, really simple with it. If you've noticed, there's become a premium in Major League Baseball for home runs, but even more so, the big indicative stat is OPS, which is on base plus slugging. So your slugging percentage is the number of bases you get per hit, per at bat, basically. So if you have a 4,000 slugging percentage, you hit a home run every at bat. Means you're batting 1,000 and you're getting 4 bases every time you get a hit. So, lots of good slugging percentages are in the high 500s, 600s realm, right? That means you hit a lot of doubles and a lot of homers. And if you got some speed, those can be triples as well, right? So there's a premium put on that, because the more bases you accumulate, obviously, the better your ability, because doubles are almost automatically scored just about everyone from first base. So it doesn't matter if there's someone on base. If you're hitting a double or more, you're going to score more runs for your team. That's the premise. So OPS means you're a quote-unquote productive hitter that can hit in the middle of a lineup where there might be more hitters on base, right? It's you make some small assumptions, but these are situations that are commonly seen in good teams, and therefore makes that player valuable with people in front of him that might get on base more. For example, so you start to form your lineup in this idea. The things that go into on base, obviously, are hits and walks. So if you walk a lot, you get a good amount of hits and you hit a lot of home runs. So if you say you hit 250, but you get on base at a 370 clip or a 360 clip because you hit 40 home runs a year, and therefore you're pitched around more because guys got to pitch around you a little bit more. Be careful with you when there's lots of guys on base because you hit a lot of homers, for example. You walked a little bit more, so you're on base more. Add in the fact that you hit 40 home runs, which increases your slugging percentage, your OPS is going to be high and therefore desirable. That is a stat that's looked at more often for hitters, and they're being stacked through lineups, and you're seeing it more and more and more. Teams are going for OPS as opposed to batting average alone, because batting average accounts for all hits, not specific high value hits, right? for specific players. So you start to put guys, and you seeing guys like, for example, Joe Mauer for the Twins. Joe's got an amazing approach at the plate, and he walks a ton in high, and he's a good hitter in high pressure situations. Though his slugging percentage isn't as high, so he's not a 4 or 5 hitter, but he's a 2 hitter because he can be on base for those guys with the higher OPSs later in the game, 3, 4, 5, like Miguel Sano, and so on and so forth. Brian Dozier sees a lot of good pitches early in counts. He bats leadoff for that reason, and he hits those balls hard. You cannot make early mistakes just because nobody's on base. So you see that Brian Dozier's hit a ton of solo homers in his career, but he's pitched differently when there's people on base. And he's more valuable in that leadoff role. And he also, because of his home run power, gets walked a lot, which puts him and Joe on base quite a bit, right? So it's kind of a you're looking at run production from the Minnesota Twins. Those are 2 stats that are taken into account, and this is like basic stuff. You can get even deeper and deeper and deeper. So let me just talk a little bit about what this means for baseball. Now, there's 2 kind of camps, and there's been a little bit of push and pull. Okay, traditional relies very heavy on traditional, old school, as it's called fondly in baseball, is the eye test. I feel like he should throw this pitch here because this is how he's set up, or this is how I would set him up. But it's kind of based on memory, and it's kind of based on gut, and it's kind of based on what you see in front of you now and what you've seen in the past and what you can remember. It's not necessarily a scientific, approach, but its value comes in the form of intangibles, right? The seeing of intangibles, how a guy reacts mentally in certain situations. Yes, he can hit, but does it all go away in certain situations? That's something that no numbers that a number might tell you, but it won't necessarily point to an intangible, mental approach, right? Seeing a guy play not only under pressure, how they play when they're not under pressure, how they play in low adrenaline situations, how they play, knowing them as a person. Are they like me? Are they intellectually curious? Are they what are they driven by? Like, these are things that you'll never ever ever find from a number, or it won't become apparent unless you talk to them, or unless you see them, or unless you interact with them in some way. And there are certain times, there's a lot of times when going on confidence in something that you feel is best in the situation, but doesn't necessarily go into a scientific reasoning, is a better decision than picking something based on a scouting report. And the interesting thing in baseball is finding that balance, right? And that's the push and pull that's happening, not only player to player, scouts, coaching, front office, all kinds of people, but the fact of the matter is they're both inherently valuable, and if you find the right balance for you, you're going to be the best player that you could possibly be. And that's why it's so exciting to me. I love having an explanation for why things happen, and I like having creating a game plan because it double emphasizes it. Yes, I've pitched against this person. Yes, I feel like he hits this stuff well, this stuff not well from me. But then I can go look at the statistical analysis of it, and I can tell if I'm right or wrong, or if I'm kind of off base and maybe making the decision. Maybe I got ahead of myself there by thinking that or making that assumption, and I can then adjust in my head my game plan a little bit because it wasn't actually the way I perceived it to be. Because data doesn't have a perception; it has a what happened. So you add your perception with data backing it up or not backing it up to find solutions to problems or find why something's working. So that from a sabermetric standpoint, I see extreme value in that. And to be honest, it's fun, right? To talk in that way, create lineups in your head, all this stuff. You see a lot of, I understand where it came from, how the people who designed it came up with it. And baseball it's a game played in physics. It's math. We're out there. All the runs add up to the number of runs the team had. All the hits add up to the number of runs all the hits add up to the runs. Like, it all adds up. So if you can look at it sequentially, how did this story play out, and you can find the indicators that caused it either to go well or not go well, you can start making informed decisions. The more often, the better your data get. The more you trust you create your own strategy for your organization, for your team, and therefore, and then you start to see results. And I think that we've seen it with my team, and I think we saw it with the Cubs a couple years ago, and anywhere wow, I'm blanking on the name, but the GM for the Cubs and the GM for the Boston Red Sox before that, who won two World Series with both those teams. I can't believe I am blanking the name right now, but I think you all know who it is. Advocated for a lot of this stuff. If you've seen the movie Moneyball, it was a much simpler time then, but this is kind of where the advent of that stuff happened. Guys getting on base can then be hit in by hitters, and we're going to score more runs that way. And that's the way we're going to form our team, even if that's not traditionally what people think. It's based on science. So they started doing that, and they saw a lot of success from it. But since then, even, it's been taken so much further, and there's so much more information out there. So now let's take it even one step further. We're starting to get to the point where you can actually see things not only in sequential statistics, traditional stats, what happened in the game, but in actual physical statistics and data about a pitcher or a hitter and the way that they move and the way that what they does works. For example, the way that a spin rate or the way that a ball spins affects how a hitter sees it, and then affects how they make a decision on how they're going to hit it. It does. The way we work, the way depth perception works, for example, and this is deep, right? This is where organizations have taken sabermetrics even to the next level. I don't even believe this is in the realm of sabermetrics. I don't believe that if they use that vernacular for this, but the way I think of this is actual physical data. This is wearable tech type data on players. It's really interesting to me as well, because I believe that some of this stuff applies to me, right? Or all of it does, to be honest. Everyone's got something. You can talk about spin rate of the fastball. So think about it this way. Hitters, the way depth perception works, that's what I was talking about before. The way depth perception works is when you go to catch something, hit something, throw something, and you're picking somewhere to throw it, your brain automatically compensates based on your experiences. So when you go to catch a ball, for example, someone who hasn't caught anything very much, they have trouble putting their hands in the correct position and timing it right, correct? If you ever underhand a ball to a 6-year-old who has very little experience in their own body, or even catching anything, and they've only done it a few times in their life, they have trouble when to close their arms, determining how high or how low it's going to be, factoring gravity, right? All of those things comes through experience. When a hitter's hitting, they automatically factor in angle, and based on that angle they see, they then factor in gravity and how gravity is going to make a ball move, even if it's subtle. So when we play catch, we automatically can tell if it's going to stay up, stay down. If you ever seen like a pro guy play catch with someone new, and I've experienced this, a guy with really, really good carry in his ball, aka most of the time it means spin rate, means it cuts the air slightly more, and gravity doesn't take it as much. It stays on its plane longer, and gravity doesn't affect it as much as, say, a guy with lower spin rate that wants the ball to move earlier, right? So you play catch with like a spin rate guy, and you kind of compensate your glove down, and it's actually higher than you thought, and you kind of stab at it, and you kind of get one of those going, wow, that actually carried farther than I thought it was going to be. That guy probably has spin rate because of the way that his ball moved, and because you didn't compensate correctly when catching it, hitting it's probably just as hard, right? So you talk about guys go, this guy has high spin rate, this guy has high spin rate, he can throw high fastballs up because he has high spin rate. I have an above average spin rate as well, right? But you can also factor in my angle. I'm 6'5", but I drop and drive on my back leg, meaning I'm not as tall as, say, Kyle Gibson is when he releases the ball. He is standing up a lot more tall. His back leg's bent a little bit less than me, and his front leg bends a little bit less than me, and he throws low in the zone because he throws sinkers. Stays taller. The premise of how Kyle Gibson throws fastballs is he wants that angle to then be more than it looks like, because he throws two seams that run down. So he wants a hitter to see the ball actually higher than it actually is, and either hit the ball get on top of it, or swing over it. Right? Which causes, what do sinker guys do? They get lots of ground balls. That's the idea. You're looking at it playing, the compensation in most hitters' heads is this ball is going to be at a certain point, and it's actually lower than that certain point. Spin rate is the exact opposite. So my angle is a little bit lower for a tall guy, but I have just enough to make it look like it's going to be lower in the zone than it is. But because gravity doesn't take it in a clear way downwards, we're talking four-seam fastballs up, that hitters will then compensate lower to see the ball. They think the ball is going to be lower than it is, and they end up swinging under it. I'm also a big fly ball guy. I give up, 0.7 ground balls for every one fly ball I have. So that is a weapon for me for swings and misses. High fastballs, top of the zone. Guys can pop them up harmlessly, like in the infield, or they can swing under them. Now, a common problem I have sometimes is getting slightly even lower in the back leg, say 3 inches. So that little bit of tilt I have that gives that perceived this ball is going to be lower than it is, it goes away. And from a hitter standpoint, the plane never changes, so they don't compensate, and they can see that it's going to stay up, and they square it a little bit more. And I've seen that over and over and over again. When I had my worst outings in the last, I haven't pitched in 6 or 18 months, but even the year before that, when I had my worst outings, I was the lowest on the mound. And I was the most inconsistent in throwing the ball where I wanted to as well. So combination of poor location and poor deception were allowing my four-seam fastball to get hit a lot harder. It was night and day. So that's something that's quantifiable. There's technology out there, that slow motion cameras, trackable balls that tell you what your spin rate is. You can go look up TrackMan data and StatCast data on brooksbaseball.com if it's something you're interested in. It's all velocities as well. And so we see decisions being made in that realm, right? This guy's high spin rate. He strikes out more than 1 per 9. 9 per 9, meaning more than 1 per inning. One hitter per inning he pitches. Meaning, if you strike someone out, vast majority of the time, there's no run scored at that point. So, if there's 2 outs, bases loaded, if you're a guy who relies a lot on ground balls, a ground ball hit in the infield could go through the gap, or an error could be made. There's just a lot more scenarios that could play out that involve run scoring as opposed to a strikeout, which runs probably aren't going to score, with exception to a wild pitch or pass ball, which is rare. So that's a desirable stat. It's a zero value. It's very high strikeout is a very high value outcome for a pitcher, and then now there's a premium set on spin rate, because spin rate often leads to deception and therefore swings and misses and therefore strikeouts. So guys with high spin rates on their curveball, again, it moves more, cuts the air more for the most part, and it's harder to predict the movement on, because again, common curveballs with medium spin rates move. That's what is seen most often. So that's when you see a guy like Dylan Betances has a high spin rate on his curveball. High spin rate on Wade Davis's cutter. These are all, or anything Corey Kluber throws, right? It's the outcomes are seen as being indicative of how the ball comes out of hands. And we're able to quantify that. And as they can see it in new guys and young kids, they can then start to sequentially follow that process and start looking at other things. Is this mechanical? Is this grip? Is this how it comes off your fingers? Is your spin inconsistent? Are you like what else is causing a positive or a negative effect? And then you go from there. And it's really interesting because then from a coaching standpoint, you start to communicate these things amongst yourselves, and then you start to create drills and routines that then start to either correct or emphasize or find what's going to make this person pitching or hitting or fielding the best hitter, pitcher, or fielder they can be. And that's all extremely good. I'm a huge proponent of it because I believe that this concept is universal. I believe that there's data and statistics out there that point in all these directions, right? And this goes back to a tweet I tweeted last week. I said statistics aren't the entire story, and they aren't, right? There's certain situations where adrenaline took over and you did something you've never done before. You're going to have outliers, you're going to have aberrations, you're going to have things that, like, no matter what you do, the other guy's statistics, he maybe had an aberration in his own statistics and did something you weren't expecting. That's always going to happen. Murphy's Law, right? So it's never going to tell the whole story, but it is going to create a foundation and give you a bunch of arrows and point in directions for explaining what's happening to a certain person or a certain group of stats, certain event, right? It points you in a bunch of directions, and then you can then follow those arrows and start to look for meaning. And that is inherently valuable, but that is inherently valuable not only in sport, right? Not only in physical sports, but in video esports, in just casual video games. It's the concept of min-maxing. It's the same thing. So let me close this thing up, and I hope I shed some light into what all of this stuff actually is and what it means. Because I know that a lot of people have heard these buzzwords quite a bit. And this isn't really based on anything specific. This is just kind of conclusions I've drawn from my own team and watching some successes from a lot of the players and a lot of the decisions that, our manager, like, we have a great team of guys and a lot of smart people and a lot of really good information. And a lot of this stuff has changed since I've even been here. Like, it's been added and it's all just really interesting to me. And I know that a lot of you guys are fans of baseball and fans of the game, and maybe didn't fully understand what all this stuff means. And at times it gets a little eye roller, like, okay, come on, like, you can't just say, this tiny, it's all like this tiny sample size doesn't tell you anything. And I love hearing these arguments and hearing these conversations because there's just valid points on both sides. So I hope I could shed a little bit of light into kind of the overarching idea and where the shift has been made and then how that stuff's being utilized in professional sports. But what I'm super interested in is the lack of this process, right? All the stuff I just mentioned in very specific esports. Video gamers, and this is something I've been pursuing since I've been in Hurt, is gamers naturally min-max in their heads. Like, that's just kind of how you play games well. So these guys who are playing at the highest level obviously have to have an element of min-maxing in order to give themselves every advantage in the world to be as good as they are, right? But it's so young in the process of how it's going to work, right? Or where the value is and how much resources and brain energy needs to be put into finding out where these patterns are, because certain things need to happen in the esports ecosystem where it's worth it, right? Major League Baseball is billions of dollars of business. Winning makes an organization tons of money. So therefore, investing into understanding how to have the best team on the field is can be extremely lucrative if done correctly and if you have the right information, right? You're investing hundreds of thousands of guys into these high round picks or millions of dollars into these guys. You're picking. You want to make sure they're as good as they can possibly be, and you want to base your decision making on some hard evidence that makes you feel like you're making informed decisions on who you're picking and why, and having a reason for it, right? That all of that happened because of the way baseball ecosystem set up. So I'm super interested in, very specifically, I see that the Overwatch League is a prime example of a league that has been formed, and the foundation of it is mimicking baseball enough, or at least traditional sports enough, to where the premium can eventually be put on who has the most data and who's doing. Everyone has a lot of data. Who's using it the best to put the best team on the stage. From a reaction, from a physical, like I said, sequential, like from a physical standpoint, the same way that like spin rate and extension, all these things are like based on people's body makeup and is like unique to them. There's certain factors that are quantifiable about people who play video games that are physically high value, reaction time, right? Hand-eye coordination, how quickly can decisions be made, how quickly do they take information off a screen. Like some guys play on smaller screens, some guys play on bigger screens. All those are the same thing as that guy's 6'5", that guy's 6 foot. Like those are the same within the scientific method. Those are the same type variables, and we're just at the infancy of figuring out how all this stuff factors in. And then we have very similar sequential stats, especially in Overwatch, for example. Sequential stats, traditional stats, kills, deaths, ultimates, team fight wins, and comp, right? But then you could start isolating those statistics and win-loss and win rate, right? And then you can start isolating those statistics into specific stats for each player, where you remove all the stuff they don't have control over, and you try to derive value based on a current player where it doesn't matter what team they were on. They can separate themselves from other solo players based on these statistics. They all exist. All of that stuff exists. It exists in every competitive anything, right? You just got to look at where it is. So that's currently what we are doing over at winsenslab.com, is figuring out where those statistics are. And we found a lot of them. And how teams can use them to make informed decisions, not only on how they are playing now and how they're going to get better with the team they have, but also looking for talent that then fits into their play style. So you can pick a player not only based on what players does he play and how good is he, or what heroes does he play and how good is he, but how his play style and how his value factors into who you already have. The same way that baseball does it with getting on base and knocking people in. That's the same thing. It's just different variables, completely different games, but the premise is exactly the same. So I'm hyper interested in. I see these parallels, and it's very, very interesting to me. So that's kind of how I wanted to wrap it all in. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of the real value of stats that they play on in not only just baseball and not only just competition, but in understanding the things around us, and why things are happening and why certain outcomes happen the way they do. So that's our episode of the Trevor May podcast this week. I appreciate you being here. As always, check out the show on Spotify and iTunes. Leave a nice little 5-star review telling me what you thought. And I will see you next week.